Hello everybody, I hope you're doing well wherever you're viewing this video from. This is Mr. Chingman, and today we're going to be talking about slavery in the Carolina colony. So we just got done talking about the 13 colonies and early explorers. Now we're going to shrink it down to just Carolina, I guess, and the South, but specifically Carolina. So remember, we are still one big colony. North Carolina, South Carolina, we are together. We are known as the Carolina colony. So, let's get into it. Alright, so the headright system, that's a review of a term we learned. Remember, a headright is a large plot of land. That is a system that made lord proprietors wealthy by selling land, and this led to large plantations. Remember, these weren't small acre lots. These were big, probably multi-acre, 10 to 20 acre lots, if not more, maybe up to 100. So with these plantations, people or the plantation owners need a large labor source to work the cash crops like rice. So at first, who do they turn to? At first they tried using the natives, but the men were not used to farming and they could escape since they knew their surroundings. They were very resourceful, and also a lot of them died of disease. In addition, there was very few indentured servants, which are people that would work for a certain amount of years and then be granted their freedom. That wasn't seen too often in Carolina. So, what did they think? Well, they probably asked Britain, and Britain said, hey, we got a colony down in the Caribbean. It's called Barbados. If you look on this map in the very Florida, you can see up in the top left, Cuba, Dominican Republic. We're talking way down here. Follow my cursor. That little island down there called Barbados. That was a British colony. So they asked them, they said, we need your knowledge down there. So Carolina's first ever African slaves came from the British colony of Barbados. Plantations were common down here. They had been using them for many years. Other Africans came over on the Middle Passage, which is a term you'll be hearing a lot. That is the trip from the Atlantic Ocean, over the Atlantic Ocean, from Africa to the New World. So, the slaves' journey would start over in Africa, where they would be captured by other Africans. So it wasn't British people going over there and capturing them. Africans were enslaving other Africans and then selling them to the British. Once they were sold, the British, or I guess you could say the Americans, would put them on a ship, a very cramped ship. These are some pictures of what the conditions would look like, just awful conditions. Many did not survive the trip over. So you can see how they're laying on top of each other, like in a bunk bed style, just packed in the boat as much as they can go. So there was no sanitation on this boat. Wherever they had to go to the bathroom, they would just go. And if you can imagine what that's like for the person living under them, it was a very dirty and disease-ridden environment. So if they were lucky enough to survive the trip, they would then land in America here in Carolina. First, they had to go through inspection. This top right picture here shows you the African slaves being inspected. What they're looking for is anything deform on them. If they're missing an arm or something, it's not going to be useful. And especially they're looking for diseases like smallpox. If they had smallpox, they would be no use and they would probably send them back on the ship. Once they passed inspection, which down here, there was an inspection point on Sullivan's Island, if you know where that's at. Once they passed that inspection, they would take a boat downtown to downtown Charleston, where they then would go to the market, and they would wait at the market until an auction came up. This bottom right picture shows you what an auction looks like. So the plantation owners would come, and they would bid on the slaves, and the highest bidder would win. And they would then be the property of the slave owner. They would split up families. They did not care. All they wanted was people to work on the farm. And here is an article in one of the newspapers awareing people that a slave auction was coming up. Pretty interesting read just because it's all around here. You can see talks about smallpox and people from Charlestown. Alright, and our last slide. The reason these African slaves were so valuable is because they knew how to grow rice and other crops that they grew in Barbados. So down in Barbados they also grew rice and indigo, tobacco, those types of cash crops. So they actually had probably more knowledge than their owners. Success with the exports. So basically selling those crops led to an increase in even more slaves needed because the plantation owners were greedy and they wanted to make even more and more money. Pretty soon, the Africans outnumbered the whites in Carolina. That's pretty crazy to think about. And it actually concerned the white people in Carolina because they were afraid that they would revolt and just try to take over, which is always a real threat. So now we're going to go on to your notes here. I want to tell you exactly what you should have. So the first question, why were Africans brought to Carolina? Well, the reason they were brought to Carolina was to work on the plantation. Work on the plantations and harvest cash crops. And we're talking about tobacco, indigo, and rice at this point in time. The second one, what groups were used as manual labor before the Atlantic slave trade? So before, we know that Native Americans were used. But was not an efficient solution. However, because they were dying because of diseases, it wasn't enough. How did the island of Barbados contribute to the plantation system in Carolina? I mean, this is where we got the idea to use the slaves. So I put my microphone down so I don't keep making typing errors. The fourth one down. How were Africans acquired prior to the trip to the Americas? So in Africa, these Africans were sold to the British or Americans after they were captured by their own people. What happened to the Africans once they arrived in Carolina? They would then go to inspection. Remember, we said Sullivan's Island. They would then take a boat ride downtown to the slave market, and they would be sold to the highest bidder. Many families were split up because of this. Why were Africans so valuable to the plantations of Carolina? They were so valuable because of their experience working with cash crops and on plantations. So they were experienced and they knew a lot of times more than their masters. And finally, why would white Carolinians be concerned with the population imbalance? Which means, why were they concerned that there was more Africans than whites? They were in fear because they didn't want a slave revolt and they didn't want any violence. So they basically were scared that Africans would take over if they had too many of them here. Alright, so I think we have a pretty good knowledge of slavery here in Carolina. Remember, you can go back, rewind, stop, fast forward, whatever you got to do that helps you complete this. One additional thing I want you to write at the bottom of your paper is I want you to research and find one celebrity or known person from the island of Barbados. So have that at the bottom of your paper when I come around to check it tomorrow in class. Okay, so one popular or celebrity from Barbados. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow.